I have something important to say about the nunchucks, because ever since making my 2 videos, there's been quite a response from them, and some people have made response videos. And one in particular caused me to reconsider what I had said about them. And after listening to his arguments and thinking about it again, I have to say what I said about the nunchucks, that they were garbage, that was wrong. They're actually far worse. And I'm going to tell you exactly why. Greetings, I'm Shad, and I must apologise for the little troll I did at the beginning of this video and the video title, but I think it's good because hopefully it'll engage people to come back, because the more I consider about these, the more people have raised counter-arguments to this, that's caused me to re-look at nunchucks once again, the more problems I find with them. And this is me being as objective as I can with them, and if I am seeing more problems with them now than I did in my last videos, actually worse than what I thought they were. Now, some of the reply videos that have been made didn't even watch my 2 previous, only the first one, and they are addressing things that I addressed in my second video, so obviously I can ignore them. Like there's a couple that are trying to show that you can hit with nunchucks and not hit yourself, which I showed in my follow-up video. Yes, of course you can do that. I never said you couldn't, okay? So watch my second video, and that answers that. But there's been some other videos that actually takes into account my whole arguments, and 2 in particular have stood out to me. One because actually caused me to legitimately reconsider a use for flails in particular. I don't think it fully applies to nunchucks, and that's this video here. And there's another video that was done by, this is the first video this gentleman has put up, and it's done by Milani Fitness. Now, at first, I was actually hesitant to even respond to this because I understand that there is a big disparity in our audiences. The thing is, though, I really liked his video, and Milani is a very engaging, enthusiastic guy, and I think he could actually be quite successful doing YouTube. I really like the guy. I think nearly every single one of his arguments are utter garbage, almost as bad as the effectiveness of nunchucks in comparison to other weapons. So, because of the level of arguments, and the other thing is because he's really engaging, he does speak from a station of authority, he has a lot of experience in martial arts, that these are the type of arguments that I do see people who watch the video would agree with.
The other reason why I wanted to reply to Milani's video is because many of the arguments he makes in his video represents the most common counter-arguments that many people were making who are disagreeing with me at the time I watched Milani's video.
Now, having said all that, I do realize the difference in viewership, and I was mindful of that. And so I left a comment, this comment specifically. I don't actually know your name. It's Milani Fitness on your YouTube channel, so I'm just going to go according to that. I'm going to call you Milani. If it's wrong, I apologize. I know that it can sometimes be a very daunting thing if a very large channel responds to a smaller channel, so I actually asked Milani permission under his YouTube channel, and I said that I got nothing against the guy, and I really don't. In actual fact, I like him. He's funny, he's engaging, it's great. I think his arguments are garbage, and I said I'll be going in after those arguments very aggressively, not against him, his arguments specifically. And then I asked if it's fine for me to do that, and he said, I accept your challenge to a duel. So look, he's got a good attitude, good on you, mate.
Now, after making this video, fully recording it, spending a week editing it, I actually decided not to publish it because I was genuinely concerned that it could have a negative impact on Milani in any number of ways. This was Milani's first video, and I have a channel with 1 million subscribers, and it was just too unfair. The thing is, Sir Ben, who works for me, one of the game nights, has actually been in contact with Milani and been having a bit of a discourse with him, and Milani was asking where the video was. We told him that I wasn't intending on uploading it, but he insisted. We then sent him an unlisted link to a previous edit of this video, and he watched the entire thing and then still wanted it published. So this video is a re-edit where I've just refined some of the points that I've made and added a bit of additional commentary. And even though I don't need Milani's permission, it is being published with not only his approval, but his encouragement to do so. And that is after he watched an entire previous edit of this video. So I really think Milani should be given mad respect for his enthusiasm in wanting to enter into such a debate like this.
Now, the next thing I want to say, all of my audience, this guy, I like him. He's cool, and even if he wasn't cool, please do not harass the guy in any measure or send any hate his way at all. I do not think criticism is harassment or hate, okay? I think when people say things that are worthy of criticism, it deserves to be criticized, as I think if a weapon is garbage, it deserves to be criticized, regardless of, the culture it comes from. We'll be talking about that topic a bit later. And I'm just going to go in and reply to this video, not because it's going to get heaps of views, well, very well might actually, like I said, he does a good job, but because I think it's the best reply video done so far, legitimately, in full opposition to my points I'm saying, and it echoes a lot of the sentiment that people who disagree with me have been sharing in comments and other places online, and it's also going to be fun. Okay, so let's get started, shall we?
Most of the practitioners who demonstrate it and choose to create a professional opinion on them blame it on the weapon when more times than not, it's their crappy technique and misuse of the weapon that forms this odd opinion. As a practitioner of 16 years using a nunchuck,
this is bordering on what we would call the appeal to authority fallacy, meaning that only people with whatever arbitrary level of skill that I'm going to just decide based on myself, only people with that level's opinions are valid. And usually, it's not their skill or ability with the weapon, it's if their opinion aligns with the person criticizing it. This is what actually is the reality in this situation. It doesn't matter how much experience you have, okay? What matters is if you are stating something that is correct or not. Now, you can try and establish your opinion with experience in it, but it's absolutely not necessary. In fact, you can draw many valid opinions by listening to other people who do have vast amounts of experience in it. And also, you don't need to be a master in, say, the piano to be able to tell an awful, rendition if it's bad or not. To say that you need to be a master to be able to figure out if something is good or bad is a complete fallacy in and of itself. You can apply basic logical standards with zero experience in a weapon and draw a correct conclusion. For instance, comparing it to other weapons, the amount of training people generally need. Do you need the training? No, but you can observe the amount of training other people need to be able to, become competent in the weapon, to be able to figure out how easily they are to master or not. And it's such a basic, simple kind of, thing to try and establish. For instance, give a person a stick. They have no previous training in a stick at all. Are they instantly more effective and more lethal? Yes. Give a person nunchucks. No training in it. Are they instantly more lethal? Well, they'd be able to produce greater energy, in swings, by the way, it's a frayed. You'll find out why it's frayed a bit later in the video. Would they be able to generate more power? Yes. Are they more lethal? Not necessarily. If it's in a 1v1 fight, well then yes, you are a threat to more people. The other person is yourself, because we all know it's such a high chance of hitting yourself. The simple fact is, nunchucks are a horrible weapon for untrained people. That makes them objectively worse than any other weapon that you are more lethal at when you're untrained in. Just on that basic standard alone makes nunchucks a very flawed weapon in comparison to other weapons. Because as I'm going to point out later on in this video, you will find that I never said, not to my knowledge, and if I did, I was wrong, that's not what I was meaning. How can I say this is not what I was meaning? Because it was clarified by the other times in the video when I said explicitly that they're better than nothing, even though in my second video I said I'm rethinking that, and I still am. But I also said that you can absolutely generate more force with nunchucks than your bare fist. So you can do things with nunchucks that you can't do without. Now, some people say that they are a lethal weapon then. They might border on lethal. Are they an effective weapon? I still think they are not an effective weapon because they have so many problems and detriments in comparison to other weapons. You could hurt someone with a pen, all right? Is an effective weapon? Well, actually, a pen might be better than a nunchuck because it has more penetration. Something to consider. But okay, so just because you can generate more force or power with any tool doesn't necessarily make it a good weapon when you're comparing it to actual weapons that are properly designed to be excellent force multipliers that can increase your lethality regardless of your training, that you can pick up and instantly far more capable, okay? So nunchucks honestly fall into the kind of area of an imperfect tool that can generate greater amounts of power than your bare fist. And so if your aim is just to, produce greater amounts of power, sure, go to town. But if you're actually legitimately saying, okay, you want a weapon for self-defense and you are able to pick amongst all these other weapons, why on God's green earth would you ever pick nunchucks over so many other weapons that do not have the problems and detriments and other weapons that can do everything nunchucks can in terms of power generation, lethality, versatility, speed, all these things, and do more, and do not come with all the baggage and problems. Like, seriously, why would you pick nunchucks over just a plain old stick? One of the most fundamental, easily accessible weapons in all of human history. Like, seriously, if you were to put all the weapons on a tier list of, like, deadly all the way down and everything like that, a stick is probably the lowest weapon because it's not better than a knife. It's not as lethal as a knife, right? It's not as good as it's not as lethal as a sword and everything like that. And a lot of other weapons that are really good are honestly, they're just stick plus improvement. Like, what's a mace? It's a stick with a heavy thing on the end. What's a spear, if not a stick with a pointy thing on the end? What is a sword, if not essentially a metal sharpened stick, okay? Like, sticks are amazing, but the plain humble stick is probably on the lowest end of just the quality of weapons, yet the nunchucks, amazingly somehow, are actually would be below the stick in terms of effectiveness and, like, just utility as a weapon. And so, seriously, this is the issue, okay? It's not that nunchucks can't be used to a level of effect, it's why would you ever pick a nunchuck over other weapons that are so much better and less detrimental to the user? Like, seriously, there are so many other weapons that a stick is easier to find and get a hold of than nunchucks you actually have to make. You actually have to, like, actually damage a perfectly good stick, make it worse than what it was to make nunchucks. Why would you ever pick nunchucks when you had stick? Stick very good. Don't harm stick to make these crappy things. I mean, nunchucks, what are they if not just mentally disabled sticks? It's like, seriously, nunchucks are basically like a stick that had a stroke. Nunchucks are just sticks that are suffering from erectile stick function. And I mean, it does happen to 1 out of 5 sticks, so you have to be, It is literally the stick that swings back at you when you use it. It requires 10 times the training, yet is half as useful as good old stick. It is the inbred, mentally disabled cousin of the mighty stick. That's what nunchucks are. Nunchucks, and I'm going to elaborate this further in the video, are utter garbage. Glasses fell off. That's how much of a head shake it deserved. Garbage. Like, by the way, for instance, there have been lots of people who have responded to my comments who have shared vast amounts of experience with nunchucks, okay? 20 years, 30 years, who have wholeheartedly agreed with me that nunchucks are utter garbage. Are they right now because they have the arbitrary amount of experience that you're saying you have? You see what I mean? Experience does not qualify an opinion. It might inform you to a level of experience, but that's it. It doesn't mean that you're right or wrong, okay? And I showed that I know how to use nunchucks at least mildly competently, but I'm not using that to establish to mean that I'm right. I only did that to try and get ahead of people to say exactly the disingenuous kind of things like this. It's like, well, you don't have, experience to say, like, it's just some uninformed person who's... No, okay? When it comes to weapons, I actually am rather informed about it. I make my living of studying weapons because I find them really interesting and figuring out how effective they are, and I analyze fantasy weapons, and I'll analyze real weapons, and I compare them against other weapons to see how effective they are and what they should do, their primary function. And yes, when you actually compare nunchucks to so many other weapons, even the humble, plain, glorious, transcendent stick, they're garbage. And you don't need years and years of experience in this. In actual fact, many people have no experience at all, can, like, even that basic analysis I did before, that, you give nunchucks to a person not trained in them and they're automatically probably worse because they can hit themselves. And it's like, even on such a basic logical analysis like that, we find that nunchucks are deficient, let alone all the other reasons why they're so poor. And you don't need any experience to just be able to figure that out. But what I'm saying is that we can be sucked into certain tropes that we want to be real because we're invested in them. We want they're cool and things like that. Especially if we've spent years and years training in them and, promoting them up. Like, it might be a bit confronting to try and actually look at something honestly and determine, when you weigh it up to other weapons, is it legitimately good or not? And I'm not saying that a particularly talented nunchucker couldn't beat someone who is untrained in stick. okay? But I've always said, and this is the thing, is that they have far more problems than so many other weapons. They're more detrimental, they can't produce as much power, and we'll get to the power thing. I've got demonstrations to share. Yes, they can't produce as much power.
People always misunderstand me when I say that, because I'm not saying nunchucks can't hit with a lot of force, because a lot of the replies that people have made is demonstrating that nunchucks can hit really hard. And I agree, they can. My point is that when you ever take a stick that is of the same mass and length of those nunchucks you are testing, the stick will always be able to hit as hard, if not much harder. Yes, nunchucks in certain circumstances, and depending on their size, are capable of hitting very, very hard. That does not make them an inherently good weapon. You need to look at all their properties and balance them all together and then compare them against other weapons and what they offer, and then that helps us see the amazing amount of deficiencies these weapons have.
Look, there are so many issues with nunchucks that make other weapons so much better. Like literally, somehow the nunchucks are lower on the tier class of weapons than the bloody stick itself. Which really says something, let alone so many other weapons.
Let me share an analogy. What things do we take into consideration when we are trying to determine if a sports car is a good sports car? Well, obviously, it's all those things that enable this sports car to achieve its purpose. And it's not just driving fast. There's actually a whole range of very important things that this sports car must be able to do adequately for it to even be considered good at its job. You can get the fastest car in the world, but if it doesn't have any brakes, no one in their right mind is ever going to call that a good sports car. But what if it had other deficiencies? If it had bald tires and couldn't grip the road, the handling was terrible, you could barely steer the thing, but people say, oh, but it can drive really, really fast, it's really good. It's like, no, that doesn't make it a good sports car still. In actual fact, because of all these other deficiencies, it's a terrible car. So then, relating this now to nunchucks, just saying because nunchucks can do something adequately, I don't think you can do it exceptionally well in comparison to other weapons, just like you wouldn't be able to hold up a sports car as being really, really particularly fast if it's actually just as fast as many other sports cars and actually much slower than other ones. And with nunchucks, there are some massive problems that Milani even points out in his own video, things that I've pointed out myself, and just to name one, their utter and complete lack of defensive capacity. There are other weapons that are poor at defense, say like the axe, but you can still employ them in defense to a much greater level than nunchucks. And when it comes to weapons, there are some weapons that can do one thing usually really, really well, like amazingly well, that it actually overcomes other shortcomings or areas in which it can't even perform in. Take, for example, a gun. A gun has no defensive capacity either. What, you could try and block bullets with a gun? No, it's far too small to offer any measure of practical cover. But their damage capacity, their lethality is so incredibly high, and it's also very, very hard to stop that level, to stop a bullet. The damage that nunchucks can produce are easier to stop than so many other weapons because they have a whole area on their striking range that you can nullify if you're able to contact the chain, for instance, and so many other things that I'm going to be covering in this video. Nunchucks cannot do any one or even two to a few things so exceptionally well that it overcomes its profound deficiencies in so many other areas. Now, as I am reconsidering things, I think I can say nunchucks are still better than nothing if you were fighting unarmed opponents and you had no access to the vast number of more efficient, effective, and just simply better weapons. It is more likely that unarmed opponents are going to have pause or even hesitate if you have a weapon and they don't. And this, of course, includes nunchucks. So saying nunchucks are good because you can intimidate unarmed opponents is a disingenuous statement because any weapon would be able to intimidate unarmed opponents. You have a force multiplier. And there are many, many weapons that you can spin around and show levels of competency with to also add intimidation on top of that. And it does seem like there are many people who believe that just because you can hit harder with nunchucks, scare people, not necessarily more than other weapons, but because it is a weapon, you can scare people with it, you can spin them around and be really fancy with them, and you can conceal them effectively makes them good weapons. No, the standard of what a good weapon is applies far more broadly. If you want to narrow down these considerations into a very specific situation in which the nunchucks have benefits, you are then also acknowledging that there are so many other situations in which the nunchucks are garbage in, which makes them bad weapons as well. And that is not saying that they can't be useful in certain situations, or that you can't hit hard with them, or that they can't be effective. Yes, they can be a useful self-defense weapon, but not a good one, not an efficient one, and if anything, they're a very imperfect and also impractical self-defense weapon. And in regards to just the qualities of weapons overall, they are a garbage weapon in so many other applications in which weapons might want to be used in. So let me simplify the argument that I just explained. A weapon that retains high combat effectiveness in more situations in which weapons need to be used is simply a better weapon than other weapons that cannot retain as high a level combat efficiency in such situations, especially if its combat effectiveness is only truly present in very specific situations. This then creates the standard in which all weapons can be judged by. The weapons that retain high combat effectiveness in most situations will go higher on the list and will be now of higher quality, and the weapons that cannot be employed in as many situations will go low on the list, and they're the bad weapons. And the weapons that are on the lowest tier of the list you can rightly and justifiably call garbage. The rock can be used as a weapon, but there's a reason why we don't use rocks in warfare or self-defense. Can you hit hard with it? Well, yeah. Does that make it effective in some situations? Yes. This also makes it useful in self-defense compared to when you have nothing. Does it then make it a good weapon? No. Nearly anything can be a good weapon if you're comparing it against nothing, because you're comparing against nothing. There's no comparison, there's no judgment point, and so the thing that you can say it's better than nothing doesn't establish it being a good weapon. The way you determine if something is a good weapon, it needs to be compared against other weapons, not nothing. The base standard of a weapon is a tool that can be used as a force multiplier. It increases your lethality. And an object that can just barely satisfy that standard doesn't inherently become good at it. It is just achieving the very minimum requirements. So a rock is not a good weapon because it can be used as a weapon. It is a barely adequate weapon at most. A good weapon is a weapon that can fulfill the requirements of a weapon, being a force multiplier, to the best, most efficient, most effective level possible in the most situations you could find yourself in which you need a weapon. And when you compare nunchucks to nearly any other weapon, they are garbage.
Now look, I've probably really ticked off a lot of traditionalists, so much so that they wouldn't have even come this far in the video, so maybe it's too late for me to say, but I will say this, right? If you want to teach the nunchuck for tradition's sake, okay, because history or whatever, to build up perhaps coordination and because you like it and it looks cool, and I never said they didn't look cool, they look great, that's what attracted me to nunchucks using in the first place. Nunchucks are flashy and they look awesome. All power to you. I think that's great. They're a fun martial arts weapon, but in terms of their efficacy, in comparison to other weapons, they are garbage tier.
One of the biggest accusations made against nunchucks is that they can't pack as much power as, let's say, a stick.
Yes, they cannot pack as much power as a stick of same mass and length. That's the key point of comparison. And so the nunchucks you're using are clearly, you know, commercially made. The stick you're using, that looks like a broken broom handle. So just in that, you know, analysis right here is that there's no way to tell if it's of correct similar mass. And I think by also comparison doesn't seem to have the similar reach. The comparisons in tests I was making is that these ones are literally made out of the same piece of wood, okay? And like you'll see what happened to the cord. In my test, they are a bit shorter, but any additional level of length that nunchucks have gives them more leverage and essentially high capacity for power generation.
There's been a lot of misconceptions I've been debunking about the nunchucks, but the primary one that I was trying to debunk in my first video was to dispel the myth that they are uniquely hard-hitting weapons. Yes, they can hit hard, but not harder than any weapon that has similar mass, size, and reach. Reach is an important one when you consider striking, because the longer the striking point is away from the access point, it increases the end point rotational speed. Higher speed, combined with mass, creates greater momentum, which means impact force. The pseudoscience people try and proclaim of the rotation, or it gets some type of additional magical energy out of the ether because it's connected via a chain, is utter bullcrap. And even Milani in this video, as much as I love him, he even tries to do the same thing, using some pseudo-scientific explanation to describe that nunchucks will somehow hit harder by virtue of them being connected through a chain. People are just really misunderstanding a lot of the science and physics that are operating in regards to nunchucks in motion. At best, and this is very much depending on the type of strike that you do, nunchucks can hit comparably hard as other weapons of similar mass and size, but at worst they hit with far less power, and this is usually because of the chain connection. So I will repeat this scientific truth. Nunchucks do not hit uniquely harder than any other functional weapon of similar mass and size. If anything, usually caused by the type of strike you're doing, they will actually hit with less power. The interesting thing about this is that there are many strikes you can do with a stick in which you do not actually complete a proper, efficient kinetic link either, and you're not putting the additional mass and weight behind the strike in which you could have, because the stick is solid and actually allows you to transfer more kinetic energy through that solid structure. So when you're using a stick and you're not taking advantage of the more efficient kinetic linking that you can achieve with them, it's absolutely possible to hit with less force than nunchucks, including when you put less strength behind your strike as well. That doesn't change the underlying physics that are at play here, and which will inherently give greater capacity and advantage to one weapon, the stick obviously, over the nunchucks. Which is why I was testing with max possible power, throwing all my weight, because of course there are many more inefficient ways that you can strike with both nunchucks and sticks. This was about testing maximum power. And when you throw all the power you can into a stick or a nunchucks with as much weight as you can, guess which one has higher capacity to transfer more force into the target? This is basic physics. So far from being a uniquely hard-hitting weapon for their size and dimensions, nunchucks can actually hit, at best, as hard as other weapons of similar size, weight, and reach, and at worst, hitting with far less power because they can have very inefficient transferal of energy, especially their problems with losing kinetic energy that comes from the mass of your own body that you put into the speed, and therefore the overall momentum, you lose that through the chain, and it not having a solid structure to the striking end.
Here is what a stick sounds like. Now, let's hear the nunchuck, both at full power. I don't know if you could hear a power difference there, but I would say that they were relatively similar.
So I'm sorry, I'm not convinced at all. And the fact that, honestly, the stick you're using there looks pretty small. If you're wanting to use a stick, get one of at least similar size and weight to the nunchuck. You know, a big, long, girthy stick that you can really grab and swing properly. Big stick. You want big stick energy. And look, I'm not teasing you for the fact that you have a little stick. Not everyone can have a big, girthy stick like me. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist, mate. You left yourself wide open. It's very little stick you're using. It's, you know, big sticks are better. I'm not insinuating, I'm sure. Anyway, let's stop. We're not going further with that, okay?
One of the biggest complaints I've heard from these practitioners or experienced users of the nunchucks or people who claim to understand them is, well, nobody knows how to hold it right. One person says this way, another person says the other way. Oh my goodness. Come on. Just like with any weapon, it's preference. It's preference. And different preferences offer you different advantages.
I totally agree. Totally agree. In fact, this is one of the points of the video I think it's great. Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah, use the nunchucks how you like, and there are advantages and disadvantages to both. And so, I love your video. Even though I disagree with most of what you said, this one has actually, and there's a couple of other points where I'm on board. I agree. And yeah, hold the nunchucks how you want.
Okay, and another big accusation made against nunchucks is that you can't hit solid objects like it. Granted, humans aren't entirely solid, but you can't practice striking with it because it bounces off and hits you?
You know what sticks are great for as well? Walking sticks. Look at this. They're so stylish. This is going to be my walking stick now, and then I've got a weapon. But on this point, unfortunately, sir, you're strawmanning my position, okay? Because you need it's funny, he does mention things that are in reference to my second video, so I assume he has watched it, but this is discounting what I said in my second video, is that, of course, you can strike in ways that are more controlled, but that's against, and even the demonstrations that you show, it's against a static target. As soon as that target does something you don't predict and say moves closer, and so the nunchucks strike in a way that you weren't predicting because you can't predict your opponent in every situation, they can deflect and hit you. And what you thought was a safe strike where you're going to follow through, yes, it can deflect and hit you and cause serious injury and make you just lose the fight completely by self-elimination. That's the point that you need to properly address if you're going to try and establish that you can strike safely with nunchucks. The point I made in the second video, you can't control your opponent, and there are vastly higher chances that you're going to strike in such a way in which nunchucks are going to deflect. And remember, like, even on follow-through strikes, like what you're saying, if you always, actually, you don't say all, but it seems like you're saying if you do follow-through on your strikes, there's a much less chance of hitting you. No, that's only if you're hitting with the tip, usually, of the nunchuck. If you do a follow-through strike, and you strike someone right dead center of that, it's going to bounce off and deflect. The tip has a much higher chance of just following through. Middle, nah. And for that to happen in a real fight, as I show in my second video, all that needs to happen is your opponent to move a little bit closer than what you were expecting, and so instead of hitting on the tip, you hit middle, and deflection hit you, and bad things can happen. So the point that you're making isn't actually addressing my point. I acknowledge that there are ways to strike with nunchucks safely. The ways that you're showing in which you can do. What you're ignoring here is the point that I said that you can't predict what your opponent does. And you are far more likely with nunchucks than any other weapon to make a mistake, okay, where you aim and you think you're going to be hitting in a safe way and your opponent does something else that you can't predict, and the nunchuck then deflects and hits you. There's a far higher chance of them doing that than any other weapon, which makes them, just in this instance, garbage in comparison to other weapons, let alone all the other problems, all right? And so if you want to address my argument, address that point of my argument, not a straw man.
I'm going to demonstrate here a bunch of combinations of different strikes you can do, and I won't hit myself. You guys can watch yourself. What?
Interestingly, you show that you can strike in multiple different ways with nunchucks. Never said you couldn't. But you also seem to be just acknowledging by implication that there are strikes and angles that you can't hit with nunchucks. Okay, let's make a comparison. Many other weapons, from a stick to a knife, even a pen maybe, right? Are there any types of strikes in which they become ineffective, that the strike would just have no effect at all? I'm trying to think, like, maybe if you hit and someone came really down low and you hit right on the bottom end, but even midway up, all right, a solid strike is still going to hurt someone quite a lot. But you can strike from any angle you want, okay, with a stick. Any angle from nearly any starting position. You're up here, you can hit down, like, any angle, okay? Can you do that with nunchucks? Like, think about, there are so many positions where you could be in with nunchucks where you need to do something. You need to swing it back and around. I just can't go hit like that with a nunchuck. So just because there are effective ways to strike with nunchucks doesn't mean that there are many ineffective ways to strike with them in which you can strike effectively if you were using another weapon. They're garbage!
Nunchucks aren't a weapon that you can just pick up with no experience and hurt somebody with. You're most likely going to hurt yourself before you hurt anybody else.
Most likely going to hurt yourself before you hurt anyone else. Do you have such a likelihood with other weapons? It's an interesting argument, and I said it once, I'll say it, I like you. I think you're great, okay? I think your arguments, like this one, are very poor, so much so that there's this subtle, unspoken implication and acknowledgement of all the vast, negative limitations in the nunchucks, some that you say explicitly that we're going to get to. So if you can even say so explicitly that there are things that the nunchucks are garbage at that other weapons, you don't say other weapons can, but that's the implication. Nunchucks are garbage at this, and if other weapons are not garbage at, of course, you're essentially acknowledging these other weapons. So then how can you say they're as good as other weapons? You don't, and I won't strawman you, but you are trying to say that they are a really effective weapon. I do not think a weapon that has such problems and limitations can be considered an effective weapon. I could acknowledge that it's an inefficient weapon, okay? It's still a weapon. You can produce greater force with it. And I said, if you had nothing, would you opt to it? I'm not so sure, because I think if you can rip them apart, you've got two really effective wacky sticks right here. And so, it's like, nunchuck really is the disabled cousin of the stick. It's like you've got two effective, like, good sticks here that you've now tied with some type of mental deficiency that they can't operate effectively. Now, I'm trying to get there, but it's not letting me because the stupid thing is just making it worse. You gave me permission. I asked your permission. Granted, like, and you might just be all on board and just love the back and forth and the banter and the subtle digs and teasing. Like you did, hey, you gave me a dirt video, okay? It's funny. I get it. I'm not so, but if you can give it, you should be able to take it. And I hope and expect you could. Let's all be adults here because you do have a very small stick. Got a big thick stick. Sorry. Your baton, like, it's so small that you didn't even want to call it like a wacky stick. You can't even whack that stick. It's just a little baton. Maybe you can. It's a breadstick. It's a breadstick. Get a real stick, man. I want you need a. Anyway, give us your address, and I still have, like wood poles that I made this from, and I might make you a nice, big, thick, long, girthy stick that you can wave around with confidence.
And with that comes the fear of the unknown with nunchucks. Every beginner will be slow, oftentimes because they're scared.
You've got sticks in the... Why don't you use those? You've got great sticks there. I don't need to send you a stick. You've got sticks. Why'd you pick such a lousy small stick? You deserve better.
And you should start out slow. They are a dangerous weapon to yourself if you don't understand how to use them. This is another thing that makes them effective in a street situation. People don't understand them.
Maybe you could use that one because it's someone who doesn't know how to use it hits themselves. But the thing is that someone who does know how to use nunchucks, okay, are going to perform far worse in real life than on a movie.
No matter what position you're in, with a pair of nunchucks, you can almost strike from anywhere. I can strike you from here, I can strike you from here, I can strike you from here, I can strike you from here. You take one step towards me, boom!
Okay, those are some very specific positions. What about from here? Can you strike, hold the nunchuck up here, can you strike someone with here without first bringing it back to swing around? Like we're talking about just here and down. Maybe if you flick around, but come on, man, you can strike from here, you can strike, really, can you strike with nunchucks effectively from any position? And look, can you strike effectively from any position with a stick? Perhaps not. There might be, I'm sure if it was shoved far enough at your own rear end, it would be very hard to strike someone effectively from that position. But I would say there are and people might say, I've got my own stick shoved on my own butt. But there are vastly more positions in which you can strike effectively with a stick than with nunchucks. In fact, nunchucks, man, this is, look, we've really I would say I feel sorry for nunchucks, but it seems like they're now looking, they're looking as inbred as they really are as effective weapons. But even you are showing you're holding it back here. Why are you holding this one back here? Is it so, you can get the leverage and swing out? My one's too long. If it was closer, I'd get to think there's anyway. But you seem to be always going into a position which optimizes your ability to strike with it, right? It's it's almost like nunchucks need very specific start positions or, any poses, brace positions, stances to be able to strike effectively with them.
Tell me honestly, would you really want to approach a piece of hardwood oak spinning like this in front of somebody? You tell me.
Now, you don't say this in the video, but the example of you spinning around, would you want to approach someone like this if you were comparing against an unarmed person? And I mean, you have a force multiplier. Of course, any person is going to have pause if you are unarmed and they have something that can strike with far more damaging power than with their bare hands. But doesn't mean that you're suddenly invincible. In fact, if you know the limitations, there are many problems doing that. And then if I had a weapon, and I would always try and avoid conflict anyway, but if there's no way to avoid conflict, or I was trying to, protect people who have trouble getting away or running away and stuff like that, and you're in this position where you're forced to defend yourself and others, okay, yeah, there are so many, give me a stick, I would feel very confident because I know the limitations. To assume that that is actually an effective type of defense or would ward people off, there's a point to be made about intimidation, but to think that is actually a solid either offense or defense, to me, I feel that reveals some of your own lack of understanding in actual combat. Us guys in the Hemi community have actually experimented with the efficacy of spinning with swords. Specifically, if the classic kind of spinning, or spinning like this, can have any measure of effective defense. The thing is, the big problem with spinning is that it looks flashy, and, you know, movies and everything show that it's really great. In reality, it's garbage, because it's actually large portions in which the sword is not defending yourself. If I'm doing a spin like this, okay, there's only a couple of times when the weapon is actually facing the opponent. Now, I'm demonstrating this with a basic foam LARP sword. I could do it with steel, but this is instructive enough and it's safer, okay? And so, do you see this? These are the points in which the weapon is forward. Every other time, which is actually far more often, the weapon isn't even facing your opponent. And even then, I can't predict the angle of attack the opponent is going on. And usually, if you had a static defense where you can block and do something far better, you can guard your lines so much better compared to something as stupid as this. That even if you're spinning really fast, most of the time, this actual weapon is not going forward, okay? Most of the time, it's actually behind you. So it's actually remarkably easy to break through a defense like that. It might be intimidating, but if someone who either knows how deficient these things are compared to other weapons, or is just really committed, that's a horrible attack, offense, defensive action as well. The other point why such a movement like this is garbage, okay, is that this isn't solid, all right? And so when this weapon comes in contact or contest with another weapon, which one will break through and have a chance to hit you? Obviously anything that's solid, because this isn't solid, and so it doesn't matter how hard you swing, okay? If someone is committed enough, of equal power, even less so, it'll break through that and the stick will come and hit you, okay?
And I'm not saying that these are the best weapon to ever exist and that you can take this against a sword and that you can take this against short swords or you can take this against a spear, but they are a really effective weapon for short range to medium range combat.
I guess this depends on how you establish or define effective, okay? Because in my mind, a weapon that requires such vast amounts of training to just not be a detriment to yourself makes them very ineffective. Okay, what if you know how to train them? Are they then effective? The capacity for them to bounce off and hit yourself because you can't predict your opponent, I'd say that makes them, less effective than other weapons. The fact they can't hit with as much power, the fact that you can't do certain specific strikes like jabs and everything like that, the fact that you have to reset yourself to strike properly with them as well. They have so many problems that in comparison to other weapons, they're very ineffective. But do they enable you to hit harder than your bare fist? I've always said that, then yes. And is that the bar of a weapon that you can just hit hard? Because, look, a rock is, in that sense, an effective weapon. But really, would you pick a rock over a good stick, which gives you proper leverage or something like that? Or many other effective weapons that you can conceal just as easy, if not easier, that aren't illegal, and so many other reasons like that? No. Nunchucks are not an effective combat weapon, and your standard for an effective combat weapon shouldn't be, can you hit harder than with your fist, okay? There should be other important standards that we compare it against, like safety to the user, like efficiency, like versatility. And in those comparisons, and other ones that I didn't even mention, nunchucks fall so short.
And if you're fighting somebody inexperienced, you have a major upper hand. Not only are they scared of them, but if you know how to use them properly, you can catch them off guard almost anywhere.
Come on, mate. If you're fighting anyone who's inexperienced and you have anything that's a force multiplier, you have a massive upper hand. Let alone, you don't even need a weapon. If you're fighting someone with inexperience, bar anything, you have a massive upper hand if you have any level of training. I mean, come on. That does not validate nunchucks at all, just because you can hit harder with them than with your bare fist. No. And especially if you can have a better weapon that's easily more available, that's more legal, and everything like that, like an extendable baton or a stick or something like that, those options are so much better. And so your standard should not be, are they going to be good against an inexperienced opponent? Because you would hope a weapon would be good against an experienced opponent too, would you not? Like, seriously, because if you're fighting against someone who actually legitimately knows the limitations of the nunchucks, especially if they're confident that they can tank a hit, if they run at you, hold up here, and just are going to power through a hit, one of the key things to be able to defeat someone using nunchucks, close the distance, get right in close, because as soon as you start grappling and everything like that, as you yourself acknowledged, oh, yeah, you might be able to hit, oh, come on, mate. And then if your opponent has a weapon and they have any measure of experience and they know the limitations and like, not just strike force, but let a nunchuck hit against a stick and the stick powers through, if someone knows that, okay, that the nunchuck is so garbage defense and they're confident that any solid strike is going to just blast through a defense and the only way that they're going to be able to protect themselves is to dodge the strike, you are at a huge disadvantage. So the fact that this example that you're framing, that you specifically say nunchucks are effective against inexperienced opponents, again, it seems like you're directly acknowledging that nunchucks would be less effective against experienced opponents versus other weapons. And that's a problem, isn't it? As I mentioned before, wouldn't you hope that weapons would be just as effective against experienced opponents versus non-experienced ones? And if you're going to be saying intimidation factor, you can spin around a stick and a sword and be very intimidating as well. I would say just as much with the nunchucks, okay? And so, again, I think there are legitimate, self-defeating points of logic in your own arguments by the fact that you're framing them in such a way that they're excluding important points that when brought back into discussion, your arguments suddenly become very weak.
Now, a sad truth to these traditional weapons is that defense is almost non-existent with these.
Thank you! Yes! And this is, I'm baffled by, if you can, and look, again, I love you, mate, and you can acknowledge that nunchucks are garbage defense. You even say no defense at all. How can you then say that they are comparably effective against any weapon that offers some measure of defense then? So how can you, granted, you're not necessarily saying that, but you are saying that they're a great weapon for self-defense, or by implication that you are, and you say they're great for long to medium distance stuff like that. How can they be great and really good in this respect if they're so garbage at defense?
And remember, any potential benefits that they might offer do not outweigh this massive problem, their lack of defense, as well as many other issues.
But there is one element of defense that nunchucks are phenomenal at, that no one has acknowledged, and that they are incredible at protecting your own virginity. Hey, funnily enough, I actually did lose my virginity after I gave up on nunchucks. Science, it's proven, this case closed. You heard it here, folks, directly from the mouth of Shadiversity. Give up the nunchucks and you will lose your virginity. But my own personal advice is get married first. It's a good conservative plan. I did it. It's worked out great. But to be fair, I did give up the nunchucks in favor of a massive girthy stick instead, so, there's that to consider.
So yeah, defense is essentially non-existent with these, and anybody who tells you that you can grapple with these is on crack.
Get some help.
I love it. This is what I mean, Milani. You're great. I reckon you can make awesome videos, okay?
Okay? You cannot strangle somebody with these like this. If I'm trying to strangle them like this, no. Never try that. You can't grapple limbs with this. You can't do that. Don't ever try it. The only thing these are good for is quick, powerful strikes.
The only thing they're good at are quick, powerful strikes. The only thing is that? Because I would think that an effective weapon you would want to be able to do far more. Like, what about close range strikes? Quick, powerful. It's like, you would want a strike to be quick anyway. But seriously, defense, as you mentioned, but there are so many, the fact that, again, you seem to be acknowledging the limitations in your own argument. And then how can you then say that they're such a good weapon if you're pointing out such limitations? It's a bit hard to understand. You literally say the only thing they're good at is quick power. If someone's trying to sell me nunchucks and they say, okay, they're crap at defense, but they're good at this, and it's the only thing they're good at is quick, powerful strikes, I'll be like, hang on, you're trying to sell me this? Get stick.
And the only thing you can do to dodge big attacks, let's say with a staff or a stick or a baseball bat, you gotta move. Okay? If I'm in my fighting stance and something comes towards me, I gotta move, okay? I gotta move to the side. I gotta move.
All right, in all seriousness, and look, I'm only making fun of you lightheartedly, okay? I love you, mate. It's all good. All right, but in all seriousness, you know what you don't have to do with so many other weapons? I think I already said that. You don't have to move. You can deflect. You can strike into their strike, overpower them with a point of leverage, and get out. You can jab. You can do so many things. Like you're saying that you're essentially saying any powerful strike that's coming out with the nunchucks, you got to move. That's again a problem. It's like you're like having a weapon which you have to move out of every heavier strike coming in. The other thing that nunchucks are really good at is getting girls to move away from you, protecting that virginity. Like I said. All right, look, I know nunchucks are fancy, and that can impress girls. I mean, but it's become a very weebish weapon. And when you really know the limitations, and when you say they're so good, it's like, yeah, that's not impressive. It can be impressive, like there's fancy stuff, but it's not impressive as a combat weapon. Just to clarify.
Another brilliant advantage to the nunchucks is that they don't really require loading up. When we're talking about a baseball bat, we're talking about this. We're talking about the motion before the strike, okay? Even if we're talking about a baton here, we're talking about the load before the strike. With a nunchuck, since we're relying on the whip of the chain, we don't necessarily have to load up. We could be a caveman and say, "Hurrah!" That's not how you use a nunchuck. And plus, if you strike like that, you're probably going to end up hurting yourself again. If I do what's considered a nunchuck a jab, I didn't really have to load up there, okay? No load up. Even if I want to strike across, okay, there's no load up there. There's no load up there.
When you're saying there's no load up in these quick strikes where you're doing like that, right? Where is the back end of the nunchuck? You technically are winding up. You're winding it up from this position to go and hit and then back in. Okay, so absolutely there's an amount of wind up. In actual fact, try and hit with nunchucks without a proper wind up, like there, okay? All you can do is like that. That was pathetically weak. Are you saying that you can't strike with a stick without winding up? Like really? So you're here, you know, and this is far less wind up than, you know, a flicky nunchuck thing. You're saying you can't do that. You're just there, can't do that.
Adding on to my points about the differentiation of power between these two weapons here, let's talk about the stick for a second, okay? So when we're striking with a solid object like this, we have directional force and we have rotational force coming through the shoulder and coming through the body, okay? It's a very powerful weapon. But when we're talking about the nunchuck, not only are we talking about directional force and rotational force, but because this has a link in the middle, we are also getting centrifugal force, increasing the power of the weapon on the target.
First of all, having a link in like nunchucks does not discount what you are calling centripetal force. So you say centripetal, and then you show an image of centrifugal force. And by the way, like it's technically a false force. The force that people often misunderstand is the correct term, which is centripetal force. You see, there is an assumption that when something is rotating from an access point, that you feel a pulling out, and you think the force is then pointing in that direction. That's a false force. What you are feeling is the effect of the centripetal force carrier, which is the thing connecting the whatever mass is moving. What you're actually feeling is inertia, okay? And so what this stick wants to do, it wants to move in this direction. And when you connect it to a rotation point, this rotation point stops it from moving in that direction and causes it to rotate. And you are changing the momentum into, I think it's rotational energy. I'm going to fudge some of the descriptions, but it's a far more accurate representation of what you were saying before. And I'm able to redirect that momentum into an actual, you know, curved path. And so what you're trying to, you know, establish or think is that because there's an outwards pull, that when you let go, it's going to fly up. No. If you are swinging something around and you let go at this point, guess what direction it's going to fly in? That way, because it's inertia. And there's actually no true outwards force pulling that way. There's a force pulling it in, which is the centripetal force carrier, the connection point, okay? And because holding here, the centripetal force is causing it to rotate along a curve, but as soon as you let go, it's going to travel in the forward direction in which the momentum, the inertia, wants to carry it. And so your first assumption that these forces don't operate on a stick compared to nunchucks because there's a chain is bafflingly wrong. The next point is that these forces, as I've described, do not increase the force, okay? Like, if anything, energy is lost through the centripetal force carrier because it's causing a change in the momentum. And so therefore, some energy has to be lost because there's a change in momentum, and more energy would have been conserved if it was just moving in a straight direction. Because what I think you're trying to say is that when you swing, well, you're saying with nunchucks. So you're saying because you swing nunchucks, you're saying that the rotation point is here. When you're discounting that even with a straight stick, it has a point of rotation right here. It's rotating along that, point of axis, as opposed to nunchucks, which can rotate along there. If anything, this rotation causes a smaller lever, which means it's actually going to hit with less rotational energy, less leverage than something that is rotating with a longer distance between the end and the point of rotation, the axis point, because the tip is moving faster. See, because it's longer, the tip will be moving much faster compared to this type of movement because the arm, all right, the rotating point is shorter. And then you seem to assume that because you feel a pulling sensation with that rotation that it's increasing the energy. It's like, no, it's not how physics work, I'm sorry. The true things at play here is basic inertia momentum and the centripetal force carrier. Centrifugal force, as you're thinking, or centripetal force, is a false force. There's no actual outward pulling force when you swing, okay? There's an inward pulling force, the centripetal force, because you're redirecting the momentum along a circular or curved thing from an axis point. And I went through all of that to basically explain your analysis of the physics of this. It's wrong. Very wrong.
If you ever know how strong whips can be, just think of that similar to a nunchuck, right? So we release, and the weapon begins to whip towards the opponent and creates a very powerful snap.
Oh boy! Oh, you're not equating whips to nunchucks because you have no idea how whips work, okay? All right, so when you whip something and you do a thing, you impart energy over a large curve in the whip. But what happens is, as that, momentum energy travels down the whip, it is getting smaller. So if you ever see a whip, especially a long one, you see them whip it, okay? You'll see a loop happen in the whip, and then it starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Now, energy is lost as it's progressing, but it's also being condensed over a smaller area, the smaller curve.
The curve that you put in a whip is also pulling on the other end. There is less of the whip that is getting pulled on the more that curve travels down. But it's relatively the same amount of energy pulling on less and less mass. And this is when the conservation of momentum of energy kicks in, because momentum is a property of mass and velocity. That curve is pulling on less mass because it's traveling down the whip, and the more it travels down, there is less whip for it to pull on, and it's also tapered, so it's getting lighter. The curve is pulling on less mass, so it picks up velocity, conservation of momentum. And this increases as the curve travels down the whip, increasing the speed of the curve, so much so that when you get to the tip, it actually cracks the speed of sound.
Okay. When you swing a nunchucks, man, it's looking so good. When you swing nunchucks, is there any reduction in curve? Are you compressing the energy in any measure? No, you're not. They do not operate the same at all. Apart from maybe, is there a curve somewhere? So, no. So the equivalence you're making between nunchucks and whips is all... I like you. This is... bad argument, man.
Think of that similar to a nunchuck, right? So we release, and the weapon begins to whip towards the opponent and creates a very powerful snap. It's not like a thud. It's not like a thud of a stick. It's a whack. It's a snap.
The nunchucks do not crack the speed of sound like a whip does. At all. There's no condensing of energy over a smaller curve, okay? It's not happening.
Now, one of these points that these practitioners bring up is, but if you get too close to a person, nunchucks become useless. They lose all of their leverage and the chain wraps around the target. If you've ever handled any other weapon in your life, you would know that that occurs with every other weapon ever made.
Every other weapon. So that means if someone gets close to me, you literally say, they become useless and they lose their leverage. Those are the 2 points. And then you say that happens to every other weapon. Tell me, how do I lose leverage? And how does this become useless? A dagger if someone comes close to me. I'm happy to wait for your explanation here. I mean, look, are you being hyperbolic and overemphasizing? Yeah, but I mean, you're very categorical. You say every other weapon in the sense that excuses how junk and garbage nunchucks become at close range because it happens to every... No, it doesn't happen to every other weapon. So close-up strikes with the nunchucks, okay, they do not hurt. I've done it to myself heaps of times. Now, I'm wearing a mic pack, so I don't want to strike it, hit it, and break it. But, like, you can actually whack yourself at this part pretty hard, and you feel a bit of whiplash behind, okay? Now, it's funny, the whiplash might cause Boromir to wobble a bit there, but that's not going to stop an attacker. It's not going to hurt. And so, when you're really close up, nunchucks are so limited in what they can do. It's like, oh, they're... Yes, you know, it'll hurt. I'm not saying it won't, okay? But you can do far less with nunchucks than you can with so many other weapons, and what you can do with those other weapons are far more effective and can cause greater damage. As we showed outside, the stick retains a high level of effectiveness. You can still strike in many ways at very close range, let alone something like a knife. But you said every other weapon! You said that! What makes what you said so much worse, you actually said if you've handled any other weapon in your life, you would know this happens to any other weapon. No, it's actually almost the inverse. It's almost like if you have handled any other weapon, even something as humble as a knife, you would know that they still retain full effectiveness and leverage at very close range. So it's almost like you could only say something like that, the very thing you said, if you've never handled any other weapon in your whole life. Just like, that's the implication. That's how bafflingly bad that statement was. Almost to the point that you might be trolling. And I can't, it could be possible, but you seem very genuine and serious. But if you are, I don't care. I'm going to be addressing, it's fully unironic because it's fun.
If we have a sword here, this is based on a katana, but we're going to use it as an example. But, of course, if I get this close or the person charges me, can I cut? I can, but not very well.
Not very well. This, unfortunately, is revealing Milani's own inexperience with swords. Because when in close range and being able to place the blade on the target and drawing the blade down in a wide slashing cut along the full length of the blade can cause insanely devastating cuts. So assuming that you can't cut very well with a sword in close range is shockingly incorrect, and as I mentioned, revealing quite a level of inexperience and lack of understanding in how swords can be used effectively.
Now, if we're talking in terms of concealment, right here I have a 2-foot stick baton, brilliant for striking, but I can't really conceal it in my jacket, and I can't really conceal it on my belt without being obviously noticed.
Hey, Oz.
Oh, hey, Shad.
How you going?
Didn't see that.
Yeah. You look like you're not holding any weapons, Oz.
Well, I'm a bit excited. I have a stick down my pants.
Do you want to show me your stick?
Sure.
Oh my goodness!
Where did this come from?
Where did that come from? That's a big stick you had in your pants. Now look.
To hold my stick? Gentle with my stick, thank you.
Daddy. Now, granted, okay, you might have to just walk with it, but even if you're just going to do this, just casual walking around, of course you can conceal a bloody stick, okay? Now, look, are they as concealable as nunchucks? Probably not, but you can get smaller sticks, like if you cut it here, okay? I reckon it'll be just as effective, if not more so, than nunchucks by a large margin, right? There is so many things why you would want to pick other weapons, like a stick, over nunchucks. And yes, you can conceal them, if you need to, okay? In actual fact, you can explain away a stick much better. Because, it's a walking stick, so they're great. If you get caught carrying with nunchucks, what other excuse do you have to hold them? They're like... What, they were rice flails in the past? Not anymore. They're nothing but a weapon in the modern day. Whereas this, you can actually get a fancy walking stick, and they're perfectly legal. You can explain why I have them. We need to bring them back. Look at this. Look how great this is. This is a mace. This is a solid hitting thing, and it is classy walking stick. Dapper, mate. We need to bring walking sticks back into popularity. Look at this pose right here. You just look classy right here. And then you have an awesome weapon. Like, it's actually really, really good. And lethal too, as well. They're great. In actual fact, the knob on this gives it such counterbalance that it becomes a really effective, like, oof. Man, I know, the knob would be way more deadly than hitting with the tip, granted. But you can thrust really well with the tip. Yeah, you would want to give them the full knob, but I mean, that tip, you could thrust so deeply with it.
Retractable batons, and they are quite brilliant. You can put them in a pocket, you know, you can put them almost anywhere. They're very concealable. But nunchucks can too be very concealable. For example, in this clip, you probably didn't even know I had one on me. It was just sitting in my back belt right here.
I mean, in context of the video, I knew you had the nunchucks behind you by a mile away. It was quite obvious. But by the way, like, a gun is way more concealable than nunchucks as well. I mean, you have no idea the type of weapons I have concealed right now. Just letting you know.
And if you ever questioned the lethality of this weapon, just have a look at our friends at Zombie Go Boom over there.
That Zombie Go Boom clip. I love the guys. Zombie Go Boom, great guys. But gee, it's almost like they were loading up in the strike. And do you really think that you wouldn't be able to achieve as detrimental results, if not worse, with a stick of same mass and length? Of course a stick would be able to blow past that as well. And by the way, that's a very specific, you know, aimed strike at a static target, okay? Much, much harder to pull off a strike like that in real life. And if you can pull off a strike like that, you could have pulled off a strike with as much wind up with a stick and produce even more dangerous, lethal, damaging results. But what if they blocked? What if they put something in the way that caused the nunchucks to hit the chains first and you lose all power? Because if you hit someone, for a fair comparison, I got to downgrade my stick. But if you did a really big wind-up strike like that and someone blocked where, you know, the chain would normally be on nunchucks, you can still break their arm. On nunchucks, it's not going to, look, it'll whip around and it'll hit with whatever it hits with far less force, but it might not, most likely if it's far enough away, or you can hit anything. And this is a weird thing. I never said nunchucks can't hit with power. Alright? And you think by saying nunchucks can hit with power makes them a good weapon. No, okay? By that logic, everyone will be using rocks. But they don't. Why? Because there are so many other weapons that are so much better than rocks. And you get more leverage, more control, more power. Okay? So nunchucks are like the rocks of the weapon world. No, they're probably worse. Anyway. Maybe we should review rocks. Rock versus nunchuck. You could probably throw rocks better than nunchucks. They're more easily available. You could use them in slingshots, but that's using a slingshot. Come on. If you just rock, I wonder if you could hit harder, depending on the size of the rock and depending on the geometry. Rock versus nunchuck.
If these weapons were truly as useless as many claim, they wouldn't have lasted this long. They'd be lost to the sands of time.
You do realize they kind of were lost to the sands of time. Bruce Lee reintroduced them as a popular weapon. Before Bruce Lee, try and see how popular they were. Really. You know, they lasted so long. Yeah, well, did they last long as a popular, viable weapon that everyone was picking over in favor of so many other weapons? No. There's nearly no historical account of nunchucks being used even at all historically or as a prominent, you know, weapon. So if there is some account, it's very obscure, so hard to find, and so many other weapons are recorded. And have a look how often clubs have been used, okay? There's lots of records of clubs being used all throughout time. Okay, how many records are there of nunchucks? I'm waiting. Yeah, Bruce Lee films, but they're not real. They're not historical accounts.
But they've been modernized and considered a lethal weapon in many countries, which is why they've been banned.
Nunchucks have not been banned because they're uniquely more lethal than other weapons, okay? They're banned because of the overhype around them. And if anything, if there was any validity ban, but I don't actually think legislators are that insightful to, you know, account for this, that they're banned because they're so dangerous to the user, okay? But no, they've been hyped up in pop culture being so insanely deadly. Like ninja stars. Do you know how lethal ninja stars, if you actually throw them, yeah, they'll cut you, but it is so unlikely to kill someone. Like a ninja star versus a dagger, the lethality comparison is insane. The dagger is so much more lethal, yet ninja stars are banned. And can you ban knives? Because knives are a useful tool, obviously, so of course not. But, yeah, the fact that nunchucks are banned does not mean that they are uniquely good, because they're banned because the people who were making those laws are stupid. Do you know Kinder Surprises are banned in America? Is that because they are a uniquely deadly weapon? Or is it because people do stupid things with them? That's like, you know, nunchucks. People do really stupid things. But like, were they, I don't think like I said, I don't think I can give the credit to the legislators for that, but were they banned because they're uniquely dangerous to the user?
I don't think I need to explain much about a hard piece of oak flying at your head, or a hard piece of steel flying at your head from the end of a chain. It's rather obvious the kind of damage that a weapon like this can do.
On account for so many people who believe nunchucks are so much better than they are, I would actually say it's not nearly as obvious as people assume, or as you're assuming. Because when you actually do a proper comparison, then you find how effective they are. Now, I never said that they can't hit hard. Of course they can. But does that mean you should always choose them over it? No. Like, because, again, just saying that they're great because they hit hard discounts so many problems, like problems you yourself pointed out. They're garbage for their defense, and they can't grapple at all. If anyone tells you grapple, what was it on grapple or something? You said they're on crack, okay? And so, if you yourself could acknowledge so many profound, large problems with nunchucks, how can you say that they're so great then? And again, we're not making the standard on a great weapon is something you can hit with, because then a rock is a great weapon. And why isn't everyone using rocks? No, a great weapon is one that is versatile, that increases your lethality to larger extents with less amounts of training, that you can just pick it up and you're instantly more effective, okay? A good weapon is one that is not dangerous to use. That's like I've mentioned so many reasons why, okay? Those are the reasons and standards that we should determine if a weapon is good, not if it can just hit hard, because you can pick up anything and hit anything hard with it. It doesn't make it a good weapon.
I beg you not to listen to people online, but rather do your research, watch experienced people talk about this weapon.
Don't listen to people online. You do realize you're online talking about it. But then you say, listen to experienced people. But a year, 2 years isn't experience enough in your book. But, I mean, what about the people who have had 20, 30 years that agree with me? There's a lot of them, and have a look at the comments of my videos. You know, don't listen to them because they're wrong according to you. But the reality is you have said some profoundly incorrect things, like in orders of magnitude, like some that is baffling slow, like your misunderstanding of centripetal force, for one, like incredible. Like it was derpy, your demonstration that you feel that every weapon loses its effectiveness and leverage when people close every weapon. Like you said those things, okay? So unfortunately, with your 16 years experience, if anything, you are proving that experience doesn't mean spit, and it does not save people from being able to say tremendously stupid things. I'm not calling you stupid. I'm saying I've said stupid things in the past as well. Own it, okay? And you have said some amazingly stupid things in that video, and I've pointed them out, all right? And so experience hasn't saved you from that. So experience should not be the say-all, be-all, and end-all on figuring out if something is correct or not. How about you disregard the disingenuous ways of dismissing people's argument and address the argument itself, the logic itself, okay? Because if truth is said by a king or a pauper, by a genius or an idiot, it doesn't matter. It is truth. It's correct. Okay? Where it comes from means spit if it is correct. I think I got that off my chest.
When learning the nunchucks, you have to be super careful.
When learning with a stick, you need to be careful. Not super careful, because amazingly, they don't have such a high propensity to hit you back when you just go like, but I mean, I would say a weapon that you have to be super careful with to not hit yourself or injure yourself would be a pretty crap weapon. You'd think so.
It's normal when you're learning to, get a bonk on the head or get a little a hit there, but when you're practicing any other weapon, when do you not occasionally bonk yourself?
I'm sorry, Milani, but you saying you actually have hit yourself with a stick? Now, look, I know accidents can happen. I'll put my hand up and say I've accidentally hit myself with a sword when I was being dumb as a kid. Granted, okay? But I've legitimately not hit myself with any other weapon that I've trained with apart from nunchucks. Because every other time I've trained with weapons, I've tried to be very cautious and careful. When you're being very cautious and careful, there's a very low chance you'll ever hit yourself with a stick, okay? It could happen once or twice, granted, but compare that to the amount of times people hit themselves with nunchucks. Is there a bit of an unfair? Of course, just to say, oh, you might hurt yourself with these other weapons, that is what is called a false equivalence, okay? Because the amount of times people hit themselves with sticks is vastly less than people ever have hit themselves with nunchucks. And I can say honestly that I've never hit myself with a stick. And I've trained with quarterstaff or bow staff quite a lot, okay? Never hit myself once. Funny that. And oddly enough, even though I have hit myself with a sword when I was being stupid as a kid, I've never hit myself with a sword when I was actually being serious, right? And actually, I was training, you know, the whole movements, the spinning. So you can do a lot of spinning with other weapons, and I've never hit myself while training to spin with other weapons, apart from nunchucks. One of the reasons why other weapons are so much better is that if I'm pointing it away from my body, even, you know, in any direction, it's not going to hit me. The only way it can hit me is if my actual handheld point is pointing towards me in some direction. Change that with nunchucks, okay? If I'm holding it here, it can hit me. If I'm holding it here, even if I'm holding it here, it can still hit me in the arm and things. In actual fact, it doesn't matter where I'm holding it. It has a potential to hit me because of this, you know, the way it's made.
Being a professional martial artist in the modern day requires a couple things. One, it requires that you're open-minded. Two, it requires that you look into any matters that you plan on educating a large mass of people on.
So to be a professional martial artist, you need to be open-minded and you need to look into things that you're talking about, okay? Now you do realize potentially your video can reach a massive amount of people, and you have said some, as I've already pointed out, astoundingly incorrect things. Like just on a factual basic level that every weapon loses their effectiveness and leverage when they're close range. You said that. You're probably the way you describe centripetal or centrifugal force. And there's a whole host of other things, okay? And so you have failed at your own standard. So does that mean you're not a professional martial artist then? I wouldn't establish such an arbitrary standard like that. I mean, gee, what does it take to be a professional martial artist? Someone who teaches it, practice it professionally? I would expect a certain level of skill. You got the skill, granted, okay? But these arbitrary other standards you're making, yeah, be careful of that, because as I've just pointed out, you've failed on one of them quite significantly. And being open-minded, I'm not sure, I don't know. You've been very dogmatically opposed to acknowledging, well, you've acknowledged the flaws of nunchucks in some areas, but in other areas, you've been very dogmatically closed-minded about how legitimately flawed they are, okay? And you've strawmanned me in some of my positions, which also shows being a bit closed-minded, because if you want to address me properly, you would address my actual arguments. So those are two standards that you've established that you've just failed at.
You can't just have a year or two of experience in a weapon, especially if you were younger, and then look back on it and try and create this ideology that it's garbage.
Yeah, I'm not trying to create a thing that is garbage. I've just been looking at it objectively, on the same standard that I compare fantasy weapons, okay? And it was a fun, interesting realization. I wasn't trying to force it, that when I started thinking about the nunchucks, I was like, oh, wow. When you really think about it, they're incredibly bad. Like, there are so many problems with it. And so this wasn't me trying to make them bad because I wanted to diss nunchucks or weebs or things like that. Hey, I have some weebiness in me. I love the katana, okay? You know? No, I wasn't trying to do that, okay? I'm just applying the same... And I've criticized other things, and we're going to get to that because I criticize the flail and other things just as brutally for having tremendous problems.
As modern-day martial artists, we need to educate ourselves in all arts and all cultures.
That's a very interesting standard you're trying to promote there. As modern-day martial artists, you need to educate yourself in all cultures and all arts? Wow! Wow! I mean, I was supposed to say too, I mean, you'd think that people who love karate, learn karate. You don't, like, if you don't want to learn other things, you don't have to. But like, you have to, in all cultures, like, all things? I mean, I would assume you would mean all other martial art traditions, but you didn't make that qualify. You're just saying educate yourself on all cultures as well? That's a really random one. All right. I guess those ancient Aztecs, you got to educate yourself on those. Otherwise, you know, you're not living up to the standard of what a proper modern-day martial artist should be. Aztec fighting systems, come on. Where is it? No, you don't. Of course you don't need to. Research what you like, okay? Granted, if you're going to be criticizing something, stuff like that, it's good to research it, as I've done, and compare it against other weapons to get a point of reference as well. That's probably good as well. But the thing is, you don't necessarily even need to do that to draw a correct conclusion. I mean, if you just basic principles of logic, you look at nunchucks like, oh, you mean you need to train and like vast amounts to just not hit yourself with these weapons to reach a equal or worse standard of lethality as you can with other weapons that you don't need to go through all that training? It's a great comment. I pinned it on my second video because by that standard, nunchucks are automatically crap. I would actually think all other arguments just adds fuel onto the fire, but you could end the argument right there and determine that nunchucks are crap with no experience in martial arts or anything else.
And create an opinion based upon logic. And not only while creating an opinion based on logic, it needs to be in respect of the culture too.
Huh. So hang on, why do you think I don't respect Japanese culture? You're saying that if you criticize one thing that is worthy of criticism, you therefore disrespect all parts of that culture? Because that is utter crap. No. Absolutely not, okay? I have tremendous respect for many parts of the Japanese culture. Definitely not all, because guess what? There were things in past Japanese culture, especially in the feudal period, that were horrendous. And you saying that you should respect it? The horrendous things? Like, think about that. You know, are you saying, like, something that I think was horrible and evil? Human sacrifice. Disgustingly evil. Are you saying that I can't criticize that because the Aztecs did it? Huh. What about cultures that practice slavery? Saying we shouldn't criticize slavery because just they're their cultures?
Respect. Why did this culture keep this around? Why is this significant to this culture? We can't go slamming something that has been around for a long time and been important to a group of people that we're not a part of. We need to do our best to respect other cultures and respect their arts.
Slavery and human sacrifice was around for a long time that we weren't a part of. Shouldn't criticize it. We weren't a part of it. It's part of their culture. Are you serious? Now look, what I'm saying here, that is not a false equivalence. It's actually an example of exaggeration. By exaggerating a point with another example, I'm revealing the flaws in it. And it's really like you're saying you just can't criticize something from another culture because it's just from another culture. No! Of course you can. And when you criticize that thing, that doesn't mean that you disrespect or dislike everything else about that culture. So don't try and vilify me if that's your implication, because come on, man.
We shouldn't be throwing weapons on the ground.
Nunchucks are garbage, man.
Okay?
Like,
No,
seriously.
That's not respectful.
That's not respectful to nunchucks, I agree. But I also don't care, because they're garbage and they deserve to be called out as such. Is it disrespectful to the culture? No. No, not overall, because I think there's great things about Japanese culture. I think the katana is a beautiful sword. It's not the best sword in the world, by any means, but it can do some things really, really good. And, I've covered the katana heaps already. Japanese cuisine. There's this new restaurant, which is authentic Japanese cuisine, open up. Oh, love it. So good. Okay? And, by the way, I criticize other things from any culture. I don't care if it's Japanese, if it's European, Middle Eastern, or whatever, okay? If there's a crap weapon, I'll point it out as crap. If there's a crap practice, like slavery, or human sacrifice, or ritualistic suicide that is imposed upon by social conditioning, anything like that, seppuku, yeah, that's also barbaric and not good, okay? I don't think people should commit suicide because of being shamed. I think that's a terrible thing. Also, really bad, killing people when they leave a religion or don't profess to a religion. It happened in Europe, Inquisition and stuff like that. Horrible. Evil, all right? And yeah, I am a Christian, and I'll point out things in my own Christian heritage and stuff like that as being horrible as well. I'm no respecter when it comes to that. If it's bad or crap or inefficient or even evil, we should point it out as bad. Because you know what happens if we don't? We just continue making the same bullcrap mistakes. Propping up weapons as being great when they're really garbage, getting people injured inadvertently when they could have picked a much better result, or practicing same social conditions and practices that are wholly evil and everything because we don't point it out because, offense and culture's not. No! If it's bad, it deserves to be called out as it.
I wouldn't make an hour-and-a-half long video explaining why something I did for a year when I was younger is trash and garbage. Otherwise, you'd be hearing me talk about how soccer is a garbage sport, which is not the case.
Are you sure about that? I love soccer, okay? But if someone has a valid argument to share, I'll listen, I'll hear. I mean, and by the way, you don't need to practice something for a year to figure out if it's bad or not. And I've already covered it. You don't even practice at all if it's so blatantly obvious, like nunchucks. You don't need to try something for massive lengths of time to find out if you still like it or not. You could try it once and see flaws and problems in it, and not even you could observe and see other people doing it, and if you approach it in a logical thing with good point frames of reference stuff and other good sources and references and things, you can figure out it's bad without any experience in it at all. Because as I mentioned, if it's correct, it doesn't come from a master or a noob. It's correct.
I only did it for a year and it just didn't interest me. It's a fantastic sport. But my point is that you can't slam something you only spent a year or two learning.
Yes, you can. I mean, can I slam it if I practice for a year and one day? What's the distinction? When is it enough? And it's actually not enough because the amount of time doesn't matter to you. Because if I practice it for 2 months and then said it was great, you would say, well, you clearly have had enough experience to figure out that it was good because I agree with you. So the point isn't the experience. The point is that we are disagreeing. And because we're disagreeing, you are then now saying my experience isn't enough, which is an arbitrary distinction. If it's arbitrary with no actual definitive thing to establish what the experience is, it means nothing. It's a useless argument and it's pointless being brought up and trying to inject it in it. The only point of bringing such a thing in is an appeal to authority, which is a disingenuous, debate tactic, which means nothing. Use the logic of the argument itself to establish that you're correct or not, because the authority that you're appealing to, again, you're just pointing out of the air, and it's whatever amount. Because if I had 20 years experience and still had the same opinion as many other people, what then? Is it right now, even if my opinion is exactly the same? No, you don't. I've covered it already. You don't need all the experience to reach a correct conclusion.
The nunchucks are not a useless weapon. They're not garbage.
Never said they were wholly useless. I did say they were garbage, okay? They are garbage. And I think people deserve to know. I dropped my stick. I'm picking up my stick. Good thing it didn't swing back and hit me. If a weapon did something like that, it would be pretty garbage, wouldn't it? So yes, I never said they were utterly useless. But maybe, I'm reconsidering because I do think sometimes maybe your bare hands are better. But what I will say, and I'll say it again, you can hit harder with nunchucks than your bare fist, okay? They can be hard-hitting things. Not as hard as a stick, okay? But they are most definitely garbage. Look, I hold no offense to you at all, mate. I love your energy. I think you're great, okay? I think your arguments were as garbage as the nunchucks are as an effective weapon compared to other weapons. But no offense, and look, I warned you I'd be going in hard against your arguments in that comment, okay? And so I'm not sure if you were aware that I would be this aggressive or not, but I appreciate you saying, look, I'm game. And guys, don't send any hate towards him, okay? He wanted to engage, and good on him for doing it, and his video was a lot of fun as well. And I actually think you have a huge potential in being a really successful YouTuber, okay? You got great skills, great enthusiasm, and you're fun and engaging, so you could go somewhere with it. And look, thank you for making a video. And the reason why I'm replying is because I think a lot of what you said was representative of what a lot of other, defenders of nunchucks were saying. And so that's one of the reasons I wanted to address it, because you can even see it in some of the comments under that video where like, this is what I wanted to say and stuff like that. And even though this is what people have been wanting to say, they were really bad arguments and they deserve to be counted. And also for a bit of fun as well. So, well, no hard feelings. But thank you. I appreciate it. Also, I appreciate you guys for watching. Nunchucks are terrible, and I'll see you next time. So until then, farewell.